you're not going to be able to see anybody.
Oh,
And
okay.
I'm going to jump off screen here in a second.
Well, and you're going to just leave me hanging out here all by myself?
All by yourself, except for right now, you got about 287 people on Twitter and on YouTube. We got, looks like about 70 people right now. So
Okay.
you're not alone. You got plenty of people here. So,
Oh, that's comforting, isn't it?
yeah, I mean, tell them what they're going to see today, what you're going to be going through.
Okay.
All right. You're good to go, brother.
Okay.
Welcome to the live stream, everybody. We're just kind of letting some questions build up in the chat. If you guys have any questions in here, if you're on X or if you're on YouTube, let them know. Yeah, let them go in the chat. And if you're on YouTube, you do a super chat. We'll prioritize those questions, and then at the end, after Randall goes through his drawing, we're going to be answering some of those. So drop them in there. We're going to be trying to monitor all of them, and we're not going to be on here for too long today, but we'll try and get to as many questions as we can. Tell him, Randall. Tell him while we're letting some more people flow in here. Tell him about your retreat that's happening on the 28th.
Oh, the 28th. Yes. We're going to do a sacred geometry retreat. It's going to be hands on. I'm going to be doing, I guess you could call it an unboxing here either tomorrow or the next day, where I'm going to show people what the supply kit. It's going to include everything everybody needs to participate effectively, because it's hands on. So it's going to be done. It's going to be taught in the classical method of using straight edge and a compass. Compasses, that such as I have right here. These are the custom made compasses that we make in our shop. Oops, should be that way, and they're pretty slick actually. I never could find anything store bought that was suitable, so we came up with this. It works really simple. You just have this bulldog clip, and you uh, pop in your drawing tool, and you can draw circles. We've also got a second compass, a smaller one, that's going to be in the supply kit in the bundle. We can make small, tight curves and circles and so forth. Um, there'll be artist quality color pens and pencils in there. There's going to be a special metal ruler with a cork back, and there's a reason for that. Uh, what else? There's going to be a 3-ring binder that people will get, something like this. I'm seeing the mirror image, but hopefully the people watching won't. And, it's going to have, we'll have handouts that'll give all the instructions uh, and such that we talk about in the workshop. So you get to take this home with you. So we'll provide the 3-ring binder, the sheet protectors. What else? TI-30XA calculator. I thought I'd just do a quick, easy little demonstration of that. I got to get used to this mirror image here. Um, I guess that's normal, huh? That I'm seeing myself in mirror image.
Yeah, I think it is.
Okay, so it's weird. I'm in mirror world. Okay, but I think as long as everybody else is seeing it normal, then that's the main thing. So I'm going to give a short. I'm going to show you the simple
Randall, real
operation.
quick, sorry to
Yeah,
interrupt you here. It looks like your audio is a little bit low. Can you turn your audio up?
I probably could do that. Let's see here. I'm not fully conversant with Riverside yet, but let's see here. I can go here. Sound settings. Um, Input microphone. Is this any better?
Yeah, it's better. Turn it down a little bit though.
Oh, turn it down. Okay.
A little bit more.
How about now?
Chat, let us know how the volume is for Randall off of that boost. Yeah, it sounds better on my end. We'll wait for what people are saying in the chat here, but it's looking good. And while we're waiting for that, we got a question here. We got a question on YouTube from Ham. He sent a $10 super chat here.
All right.
And his question is, I noticed you can draw circles, vesica, triangles, so you're drawing states shapes with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sides progressively. But how far does this go in terms of number of sides?
Well, to within the limits of your drawing capability. you can you can divide a circle up. There's a number of ways. The simplest, and we demonstrate this in the workshop, is just a 6-sided hexagon. But if you think about that, you can bisect each of the sides of this hexagon, and that by projecting from the radial lines from the center through those points of bisection, you now turn the hexagon into a dodecagon, which is a 12-sided, and you can do that. You can do that process again, and you'll get 24 sides, 48 sides, etc. Now you could also do, if you do a pentagon, so you do a 5-sided division of the circumference of the circle, same thing. You can divide each of those sides into half, project radial lines out from the center to the circle, and now you'll get a decagon, which is a 10-sided polygon. And you can do the same thing there. You can divide the 10-sided polygon into halves, and it'll become a 20-sided. But there comes a point where the sides get so small that it's difficult to draw. Now, if you're the point is like, and I'm not going to try to get into the proof of the value of pi right now, but that is actually how you would get one of the classical proofs of pi, how you can derive the value of the ratio of the circumference of a circle to its diameter. Because, for example, if you establish a circle with a radius of 1, and then one of the interesting properties, geometric properties of the relationship between a circle and the radius is that the radius exactly steps off the circle 6 times, right? So I can now, if I have a circle and I draw a hexagon in there, and the hexagon, each side is 1 unit, which would be the same as the radius, then the hexagon has a circumference of 6. If I divide that into 2, right, then what's happening is the more I progressively divide that, the more the polygon begins to form the shape of a circle, if you can picture that. So basically, think of this. A circle is a polygon with an infinite number of sides, okay? Now, in practical use, you'd have no reason to draw a circle of 50 or 100 sides. I don't think so. I mean, a polygon of 50 or 100 or more sides. You wouldn't. There'd be no reason for that, because at that point, just from the perspective of the human perspective, it'll come to the position where how many sides is it going to be before you cannot differentiate between the polygon and a circle, right? And then there's other polygons, like for example a heptagon, which is 7-sided, which you cannot actually draw with mathematical perfection. It has to do with the fact that 7 is a prime number. It does not divide evenly into 360. So you can approximate a heptagon very close, and it would be 7-sided for all practical purposes, but if you actually worked out the mathematics of it, one side is going to be just slightly different. But the point is yeah, you can draw polygons of many sides, but then it gets to the point where it actually kind of gets ridiculous. You're not going to try to draw a 1,000-sided polygon. Now, you could probably do that in a computer program. I've never attempted it because I've never had a reason really to go, I think, more than, say, 20 or 24 sides. I think that's probably the most I've ever attempted for various reasons, which would be better to explain with some visuals and some graphics. But I hope that answers the question. Yeah, you can keep going with many, many sides to the circle, to the polygon. And then what'll happen is at some point you would not be able to differentiate it from a circle. Like if you had a polygon of 1,000 sides and you were looking at it, it would look like a circle.
Mm.
See what I'm saying? Does that make sense? If it
Yeah,
makes, yeah, okay.
that does make sense. That does make sense. And
I hope that
I'll-
answered the question.
yeah, I think it does. I'll throw another question at you here, and then you can kind of tell them about what we're doing today, and we'll jump into your drawing here. But the last question is coming from somebody on X. They say their tag is Renfield101. Given what we know about precession, alignment, and lost knowledge, how likely do you think it is that ancient civilizations encoded celestial cycles into text we fully we haven't fully understood yet? Could something like the Voynich manuscript be a surviving record of that knowledge?
Sure. I definitely think there's uh, very sophisticated knowledge, theoretical and observational knowledge that's encoded into ancient texts, particularly the Vedas. I also find a lot of stuff, in the Bible. And that's not the kind of thing well, maybe we get into some of that during the retreat if there was enough interest in it. But, there's things encoded in the Bible, particularly in the book of Revelation, where you have descriptions of the holy city and that sort of thing. Um, the city lieth four square, and the length, the height, and the breadth of it are equal. So it's, in a sense, uh, describing a cube. But once you begin diving in there, it's very easy to extract, for example, processional numbers out of it, um, which suggests to me the possibility that that was deliberately encoded in there. Again, that's something that I would could actually demonstrate a little bit more. And if we'll in the retreat, we're going to have some open question time, and we can probably address questions like that. And then I have some documentation that we can pull up. I have some quotes that we can look at. Um, I've got some actually, like the Book of Revelation was written in Greek, so I've got some of the original Greek, and you look at the Greek. Um, I will mention that there is in the Semitic languages, Greek, Hebrew, and Arabic, there is a numerical basis to those languages. And this was in the like in the first early part of the first millennia um, of the Common Era, and even earlier than that. Ultimately, probably Syro-Phoenician origins for this system, but it's called gematria. And gematria comes from has the same root as the word geometry, right? So basically what's happening there is that if you go back pre-Semitic, pre uh, Hindu-Arabic numeral system, that's what I'm trying to say. If you go back before the Hindu-Arabic numeral system, you had the same set of symbols representing letters of the alphabet and numerical values, which leads to some very interesting implications. One being that you can take words, names, phrases, and so forth that were written in Hebrew, written in Greek, written in Arabic, and you can translate them numerically. And when you do that, you come up with some very interesting correspondences between the numbers of various words and phrases and names and numbers that are used to describe geometric relationships. I don't think that that's coincidental. That's not something I'm going to be able to get into in tonight's live stream. But again, for the part of the open forum in the retreat, we're going to have some, question and answer, and I will have a lot of stuff at my fingertips that I'm not prepared to get into tonight. And we can look at some of that because some of them, those relationships are quite striking and I think beyond the realm of coincidence. Um, so, yes, I think that there's lots and lots of stuff embedded in various sacred scriptures from all over the world.
Wonderful. Okay, so before we jump into this, tell the people just a little bit more about what's happening on the 28th and what you're doing today, how this is a preview for it, and then I'll send the exclusive discount codes in the chat for everyone.
Okay, so 28th is going to be Friday, and we're going to convene at a place called the Beersheba Springs Assembly, which is in the Cumberland Plateau of Tennessee. And we have run tours out of there before, and it's really quite an interesting and nice place. Beersheba Springs refers to the spring that used to be on the site that was considered a sacred spring to the Native Americans that lived there for centuries before the current facility was constructed, which, by the way, was built before the Civil War. So it has this historical pedigree. Of course, it's it's obviously been kept up since the Civil War and upgraded regularly. So it's not we won't be staying in a facility that's you know hasn't changed since before the Civil War. But uh, we're going to be there's we're going to be we've got a very large room there. We're going to have tables set up, and we'll have a big screen overhead. What I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be sitting at this table. I'll be lecturing at a lectern, but then for the drawing part of it, I'll be sitting at a table. There'll be an overhead camera, so you'll be able to see everything I'm doing projected up on the screen behind me. I'm going to have some really great assistants who are going to be walking around helping people to make sure that nobody gets stuck because, you know, what'll happen is if a few people get stuck, I don't want to leave anybody behind. I don't like that at all. So if somebody gets stuck, I don't want to hold the whole group up because I've got an agenda. I've got a certain goal I want to get to by the end of the retreat. And so we'll have people circulating around if anyone gets stuck. We start very simple. I mean, with the very most basic stuff that you need to know. I mean, just like, and see, here's the thing we'll be doing straight edge and compass, right? Which is the classical methodology. You know, in the Platonic academies and in the school of Pythagoras, you were only allowed to use a compass for drawing circles and an unmarked straight edge. And the idea was you could then essentially create the entire edifice of Euclidean geometry using those two tools, and all of the proofs and so on. And it's basically true. Now we deviate a little bit from that. We don't have to stick slavishly to the classical and traditional methods, right? But I want people to get a sense of the flavor of that, of how it would have been if they were receiving instructions in Plato's academy or in Pythagoras' school. Um, but the important thing here is that when we talk about, and I'm very much oriented towards the practical application of these kinds of things. So I'm very interested in sacred geometry as a tool to be used by artists, architects, builders, graphic designers now. Um, Anybody who's into craft. Over the past in classes and workshops, I've had furniture makers, I've had quilters, I've had stained glass uh, artisans. The list goes on. I've had landscape architects who then used the sacred geometry principles to lay out uh, gardens and landscaping with both hardscape and plants. The list goes on. Architects, of course, if you're an architect or builder or carpenter, you'll find things to use. Now, the point I want to emphasize is that when you use the unmarked straight edge and you use the compass, what you're doing is you start the creative process is going to start up here. It's going to start with your imagination. You're going to conceive of an idea. Now what you want to do is you want to project that out into the two-dimensional world. Just like if anybody's a builder or an architect, you'll know that architects, well, in the old days they created blueprints. Now they're not blue anymore really, but you actually create the two-dimensional version, which is step one. From here, you go on to the two-dimensional. So most designers now are using digital tools to design. I mean, I use CAD. I used to draw. In the old days, I would draw blueprints by hand, right? And then you'd have these rolled up paper that you'd have on the job, and everybody would look at that to reference. Now we still do that. We still do that. If you come to a job site, if the inspector from the county or the city or whatever comes out, we have a weatherproof case. He opens it up, and there's the blueprints, even though they're not blue anymore necessarily, but there's the paper plans. He'll look at those. He'll look at the project, right? Um, but like we did a few years ago, we did a restaurant here near where I live, and so I did all of the design work in the computer using a CAD program that I'm going to show you here in a minute that I use. And these CAD programs, there's many variants of them, but they're all very similar. If you use Photoshop, for example, there's a graphic drawing program in there that's very similar to the one I use. And so in the workshop, what we do is we start very simple. Like, how do you lay out just two perpendicular lines? Now, if you've got a piece of graph paper, obviously it's done for you. It's very simple. But if you've got a pristine sheet of white paper and you want to set out two lines perfectly perpendicular to each other, how do you do it? Well, here's how you do it. What about two lines that are parallel to each other, right? Here's how you do it. Or you want to create a hexagon? Here's how you do it. You want to create a pentagon? Here's how you do it. You want to create any particular shape or geometric form? Here's how you do it. Now, those techniques that you learn, with your straight edge and compass, transpose directly into the final manifestation of that idea in 3D space. So, in other words, if I was going to do building, if I'm designing a temple, let's say, and I draw it, I could sketch it out on paper, or I could sketch it out digitally. I refine it, and then I'll print it out. And then when I go out to the building site, I am using, well, in the old days, they oftentimes used knotted rope. And what you would do is you would put just a vertical pole in the ground, right? Just imagine this. Let me do this. Just imagine you've got this vertical pole here. You put it in the ground, and you have this knotted rope. Later, a chain was often used with a very standardized length for each link of the chain. And in fact, a lot of chains called the Gunter's chain, the length of each link was 0.792 inches. Now, there's a very interesting reason for that, but which we can come back to. But so you put this pole in the ground, you put your knotted rope on there like this, and each of the knot represents one increment, and you draw a circle. You can have another pole, draw another circle. See, so you actually can draw on large scale on the ground the pattern that you've drawn with the compass and straight edge on the paper, right? So that's a little bit of how the system would work. So in the workshops that I do, we're emphasizing that. Let's say I had a woman that was in one of my series of classes. She was a quilter, and we would do a sacred geometry design, in a class, and then we were doing we actually what we did was we did one weekend a month, and we did that for a whole year to get through up to the advanced material and the really intricate stuff and the really powerful stuff. But we would do an exercise, and she would go, and then the next month she'd come back and she'd made a quilt. Then there was the design on the quilt. I also had the same thing happen. He was a stained glass artisan, and we would do some designs, and then he would come back the next month, and he'd made a stained glass window, and there it was, um, the pattern that we had just created. Or he would take the idea, and he would do his own variation on it, which I always encourage, because I want people to take this stuff and then use your own imagination to become more creative. I don't. But initially, what you do is it's repetitive. I like, here's how you draw a pentagon, right? Draw it, and then I have you draw it again, and then again. And if you're doing it at home, now, of course, if you're going to do the retreat, you're going to get the recorded version as part of the price tag, the price of admission. If you're doing the live stream, of course, you'll have that, you'll be able to download it and watch it whenever you want, which is a very good way of learning because you can then learn exactly at your own pace. You can go through the exercise. Again, I'll use the pentagon as an example. So you go through this process, each step, you do through the steps, and then at the end, you'll have a pentagon if you do it properly, right? Well, if you do it once, I guarantee you'll come back 2 days later and you'll not remember exactly how you did it. So then you watch it again, and the way you really learn is through the repetition. You want to know how to draw a pentagon? Well, if you want to learn quickly, I say, okay, here, do it again, do it again, do it 5 times, 6 times, 10 times, whatever it takes. At the end of that, you now know it's here. You've got it. You'll be able to draw it from then on. And obviously, if you know how to draw a pentagon, you can then draw a decagon. If you can draw a hexagon, which is super simple, you can then create a dodecagon, which is 12-sided. We do that in the workshop because that dodecagon 12-sided circle relates directly to the division of the heavens, and there was a geometric reason for that. That the plane of the ecliptic was divided into 12, right? So when we create the dodecagon, which is the 12-sided uh, polygon, we now can look at the astronomical correlations of that, and it helps us to envision by projecting that dodecagon onto the celestial vault. It helps us to understand what we're seeing up there because that's a big part of this. If in all of the sacred structures of old, no matter when in history, no matter where about the world, we find several things, elements in common. One is the presence of the sacred geometry. The other is the presence of astronomy and celestial relationships. And no matter where you go, you find that ancient peoples were laying out their sacred spaces, their temples, even homes, urban areas, villages, and so on. If you had a main axis that the village was laid out on, it was not just random. It would oftentimes, more often than not, be oriented to some point on the horizon of celestial significance, whether it was the solstices or the equinoxes of the sun, whether it was the 18.6-year lunar cycle that they were memorializing there. Um, but what this did is it helped to orient people's consciousness to the larger domain of time and space, which I think is very important and has kind of been lost. I mean, in our modern urbanized existence, most people I've found cannot find a North Star, which once upon a time, not too long ago, that would have been very exceptional to find somebody who, from a very early age, was not taught to, at least in the northern hemisphere, I'm speaking of, would not be able to locate the northern star because I mean that was the pole star, the pole, right? The pole. So the projection of the Earth's imaginary projection of the Earth's axis is a pole. It pretty much almost perfectly intersects Polaris, the North Star, Polaris. So um, people learned how to navigate their way around, and we've forgotten that. And I try to bring those skills back. So in a workshop, we'll be out. Now, I will mention this, that Friday the 28th is going to be one of the grand alignments that's been occurring. Anybody who's thinking they want to participate, I'm encouraging everybody to bring telescopes or binoculars, even better, because we'll be able to see the visible planets arrayed in the sky along with the new moon. It's going to be a very impressive sight. So that grand alignment is going to be uh, occurring as we kick off the retreat, which will last from Friday night. So there'll be a Friday night lecture with visuals. Then Saturday morning we'll commence immersing ourselves into the geometric operations. That'll be pretty much all day Saturday. We'll have breakfast. They'll be preparing breakfast for us there. I think all the meals actually. Then Saturday night it'll be more of a social. We can go out. There's a nice big. We'll have a fire circle. Maybe we'll talk about stories and myths and that kind of thing. And then Sunday we'll pick up and continue where we left off. And then Sunday afternoon we're going to make uh, a field trip south. It's about 25 minutes south of the assembly where we're going to be staying, and in Sewanee, Tennessee. And there's a chapel there called All Saints Chapel. And the architect who designed it was inspired by the geometry and the design of both Chartres Cathedral and Amiens, which were two of the most impressive high Gothic cathedrals built back during the Middle Ages. So we're going to make a field trip to there. It's loaded with geometry and symbolism and things, and we're going to spend some time there looking at that to kind of imbibe an actual structure that was inspired by some of these principles. Then we'll go back to the retreat, and we'll have I think we're going to might even do some trance rhythms. I studied trance drumming from dervish and Sufi trance drumming years ago, and interestingly, some of the patterns in there relate directly to the frequencies that are derived from sacred geometry. So we thought it might be fun to explore that a little bit. Um, and then Monday morning, we roll out. We go. We all go our separate ways, hopefully enriched in our understanding. Now, I will say that sacred geometry is it's a rigorous uh, area of study. There's a lot to it. And you can take it really deep if you want, especially when you start getting into the more esoteric expressions of it, the philosophical side, what you might want to call the mystical uh, dimensions of sacred geometry. And when you start looking at these geometric principles as they apply to creation itself. And here's something that a lot of people don't understand about sacred geometry is that, and I used to think this way myself when I was first learning about it. You think geometry and you think space, you think spatial relationships. You look at the polygons, which are the two-dimensional, and then you look at the polyhedra, which are the three-dimensional, right? But you're still all thinking in terms of spatial relationships. Well, it turns out, interestingly, that if you look at these various forms and figures, like if you look at a dodecagon, I'm sorry, a dodecahedron, which is a 12-faced polygon. Polyhedra. It's one of the five regular polyhedra, right?
Randall, pull the mic a little bit closer to your mouth if you can.
It seems to be sliding away from me here. And in my excitement, I'm losing.
You can turn the volume up a little bit uh, on your deck if you want.
I can turn it up a little bit. Don't
Yeah,
have much more to go. How about that? Does that sound okay?
doesn't sound too different on my
Well,
end.
my volume is pretty much all the way up. If I just keep close to the microphone, you think it'll suffice?
Yes.
All right. Well, if I start drifting away, let me know. Um, so the idea here, the dodecahedron, it consists of 12 five-sided pentagons fit together. They're all the same size, right? This is one of the regular polyhedra. Um, now, each pentagon, if you think of its five sides, and it's 108 degrees between successive edges of the pentagon, right? 108 degrees. Well, there's five of those, so 5 times 108 is 540. And then for the total, whether you measure externally or internally, what you end up is when you total the 12 sides, it's going to be 12 times 540, and that's 6,480 degrees, which defines the dodecahedron. If you look at the hexahedron or cube, you've got 8, and each one is 3 times 90 or 270, and that times your 8 corners gives you 2,160. Okay, now go back to that dodecagon that I was talking about, the 12 divisions of the path of the sun through the course of the year, divided into 12 equal increments. Well, when you look at the movement of the vernal equinox, the spring point, and again, all this, if you're in the southern hemisphere, you just reverse what I'm saying. But that vernal equinox is moving it right at about 50 arc seconds per year, which means it takes 25,920 years give or take, because we're dealing with nature here, not mathematical absolute precision, mathematical perfection. But in 50 arc seconds per year, it takes 25,920 years for the vernal equinox to move through the entire circle of the plane of the ecliptic and all 12 signs of the zodiac. Well, the plane of the ecliptic is divided into 12 equal slices, right? Each of the signs, Aries, Taurus, Gemini, etc., are all divided, are all 30-degree increments of the 360 degrees, right? Well, you can do the math, and we actually go through and we do this math in the workshops. You'll do it yourself, and by doing it yourself, this is how you really learn, right? But to make the point here, every uh, division, one division of the celestial of the vernal the movement of the vernal equinox, it takes 2,160 years to move through one sign of the zodiac, right? One, I call it a cosmic month. Uh, and then within that cosmic month, there are 4 cosmic seasons. And you often see those represented in scripture and iconography and so on, particularly in the prophecies of Ezekiel of the Old Testament, in the book of Revelations. You will see this description of the 4 beasts, which are a bull, a lion, an eagle, and a man, or in some cases it's an angel. But the symbolism is the same. It's the 4 fixed signs of the zodiac because they thought in terms of 4 cosmic seasons, right? Each of those seasons is 1/4 of that 25,920, or it's 3 times one cosmic month of 2160, so that's 6,480 years. The same number of years in a cosmic season as there are degrees in the measure of the dodecahedron. In the cosmic month, same number of years, 2,160, as there are in the hexahedron, degrees that measure the hexahedron. And it goes on like that. And we look at examples. I mean, I'll actually have 3-dimensional models that people can look at, can hold, and so on, to really help get it. And so here's the thing I'm getting at. When you look at these geometric forms, you can extract these numbers. I call them the cosmological numbers. Again, go back to the Pentagon. I said 108 degrees between each successive pair of sides. You know that in a square, it's 90 degrees, right? Well, when that's a 4-sided. When you add that 5th side in there, it opens it up and it becomes 108 degrees. Well, 108 degrees is sort of like one of the fundamental base numbers of this whole cosmological system of 108, 2160, 324, 432, etc., right? And you find these numbers embedded in ancient systems all over the place repetitively, right? So the numbers that you can extract, and I will mention that if anybody has ever done meditation and uses meditation beads, they're always 108 beads, right? Now the way, I wish I had my meditation beads in front of me here, I'd show you, but if you can picture a string of beads with 108 beads on it, one of those beads is different from the rest. It's either larger or it might be cubical, it might be different somehow. Now, when you meditate, there's a special way you do it. You use your thumb and ring finger here, and your beads are hanging here. And each time when you meditate, you have this. I know some of the people listening are going to know exactly what I'm talking about, but a mantra. You have this mantra, which is this thing that you repeat to yourself, because the idea in meditation is you're trying to focus your mind onto a singularity. And the pathway to that singularity is through the device of the mantra. So you begin, and this is the hardest part when you first start meditating, is turning off your active mind, because that's the first step. You have to be able to turn that off, because your constantly active mind is actually preventing you from accessing higher levels of consciousness that go beyond the intellect, go beyond the signals coming in from the 5 senses that usually are triggering. You're walking down the street and you see a sign big sale on such and such, and then immediately your mind goes and starts thinking about that. Or you pick up your cell phone and you look at, and there's some new message that's come in, and your mind starts thinking about that. And throughout the course of the day, your mind is doing this all over the place. Well, a mantra, in a way, is like an audio signal you're interpret you're, that you're repetitively that you're repeating in your mind. The drawing exercises, in their own way, are a meditation exercise because you're focusing on these forms, these images. But there's more than that, because out of these forms you extract this whole system of cosmological numeration. Then you begin to understand that the universe, the time and space, operate on frequencies, and the measure of those frequencies are the numbers you actually extract from the geometric form. Like, we know that if you're a musician, you know that your basic A is 440 cycles per second, and the octave would be 880, right? But in other tuning systems, 432 gives you your A, and 864 gives you your octave, right? Well, so 432 C is in that sequence of 108, and you double that and you get 216, you double that, you get 432. And then you double that again, you get 864. Now, is it any coincidence that the radius of the sun is 432,000 miles and the diameter is 864,000? Is it a coincidence that the 10 Sumerian kings reigned for a total period symbolically of 432,000 years? Or that the basis of the system of the Yuga system of time cycles out of the Vedas, the base unit is the Kali Yuga, which is 432,000 years, and that the Kali Yuga is then followed by the Dwapara, the Treta, and the Satya Yuga, and then encompassing all of those is the Maha Yuga, and the Maha Yuga is 4,320,000 years. So, in other words, these are the kinds of things we explore in the retreats, right? So you can begin
Yeah.
to see these applications and these interconnections, because the idea is the sacred geometry is very universal, and we find that obsession with geometry, as with spatial orientation and the movement of the heavens, being fundamental to the ancient uh, worldview, and how they translated that into a practical day-to-day lifestyle.
Hmm.
So one of the things I'm trying to do through these classes and retreats is bring some of that back, some of that um, orientation towards this cosmic domain and the frequencies and the numbers, and how do we take that and transpose it into the 21st century, update it. Now when I go out, if I'm going out and I'm laying out a job site, and I'll do that. I've done that, and we'll put that pole in the ground, and then I don't use a chain or a knotted rope. I use my 150-foot fiberglass tape, right? And it's got a little brass thing, a brass ring at the end, and what I do is I'll put a stake in the ground. It could even be something as simple as a 2x4, and I'll put a nail in the top of that, exactly where usually the tradition is to lay out, when you're laying out a building or a structure on the ground, you lay it out from, if you're in the northern hemisphere, you lay it out from the northeast corner, because the most well lighted, this is the least lighted corner of a building in the northern hemisphere. So you establish that northeast corner. Masons have done this for centuries, right? That's, for example, if you see a building built by Masons, and it's, or if you're just looking at a building and you go to the northeast corner, that's where the cornerstone is placed. And the cornerstone will have inscriptions on it, usually the year that it was established. It may also, underneath the cornerstone, is typically where a time capsule would be placed, intended to be, excavated at some time in the future. But wherever you started from, it's the same idea. You have, like, what I would do is I would drive a post into the ground, and then there'll be a simple metal tenon or a nail or something at the top, and I'll bring my fiberglass tape. It's got a brass ring at the end, and that slides right over the top, and I can sweep out circles as big as up to 100. I've never had a reason to go over 150 feet. So I use 150-foot fiberglass tape for that. So that's obviously a simple example of, I don't use a knotted rope. We don't need to do that unless I'm just trying to demonstrate the traditional. Um, but my point is what I'm very interested is how do we translate the ancient methods, the ancient system into the 21st century and recover that and perhaps use that to create a better world, a world with more harmony. Because one of the things that I emphasize and stress in these exercises that we're doing is this relationship when you're creating a composition. Let's say here you're going to do a design. What was important to the ancient tradition was what is the relationship between the part and the whole, right? And there's a very systematic way of creating a relationship between the whole and the part that actually creates harmony. And that seems to be missing because I've had many architects over the years, I've had many artists over the years take these courses, and what I hear over and over again is why aren't they teaching this, in architectural school? Why aren't that? Why didn't I learn this stuff? Well, they didn't know about it for one thing. I mean, this is the whole 20th century has been, in a way, a process of recovering a lot of what had been lost. And we do get into some of the history of it. It's good to know some of the background of it. And what I'll say this is that the modern Freemasons have been the custodians, for the most part, of this the most recent historical incarnation of these methods that goes back to the High Middle Ages. So during those intervening centuries, it was pretty much the alchemists and the Freemasons that preserved this knowledge. And then when Freemasonry finally, society progressed to the point where Freemasons could be in the open and not be killed or imprisoned because Freemasonry, for the large part, for 500, 600, 700 years, 500 years anyway, it was outlawed. Um, by various authoritarian institutions. And even in the 20th century, when dictators have taken over, seized control, or dictatorial or despotic regimes, they'll typically outlaw Freemasonry. It was outlawed in Russia before the Soviet Union collapsed. It was outlawed in China. It was outlawed in Pol Pot's Cambodia. So there's a reason why a lot of the doctrines and traditions of Freemasonry are secret, because that's the legacy of a half a millennium of suppression. Uh, and now there's a lot of complete BS online about Freemasonry and all this conspiratorial stuff. I'm not going to get into all of that, but sacred geometry was largely preserved by the institution of Freemasonry from the High Middle Ages. It was handed down when Freemasonry during the Middle Ages was operative. So the Freemasons of that time belonged to guilds, and they were actually out there designing and building cathedrals and sacred spaces, right? Well, with the collapse of the great Gothic cathedral enterprise in the late 1200s, early 1300s, because of the bubonic plague wiped out half the population of Europe. It also wiped out the labor force. It so completely disrupted society that this great integrated uh, enterprise of cathedral building, it came to a screeching halt. At that point, Freemasonry went from being operative to what's called speculative or philosophical, in order to preserve the the traditions of geometry, of astronomy, of music, etc. This philosophical, or what's called speculative, incarnation of Freemasonry was established to preserve those principles until such time that once again they could be resurrected and applied to presumably making a better, more harmonious, and more beautiful world. And it's to me, it's just rather disgusting now we get to this stage that you have people that, are making all these claims about Freemasonry, um, and so on, that it's satanic and all of this stuff. When you think about, and you know the history of it, many Freemasons met a very untimely end, an unfortunate end, um, because of the fact of what they were doing. I mean, it was at great cost to the craft to preserve these traditions and preserve this knowledge. Okay, so that's why it really disturbs me that I see this complete unsubstantiated nonsense online that's proliferating, and people can't seem to differentiate between Freemasonry and Skull and Bones, which really had nothing to do with each other. Um, when they bring up this stuff, I ask, well, who out there in any institutions that now have secular or political power name these Freemasons, and they can't, because it's not real. It's not real. One of the things I like to point out is there were 14 verified U.S. presidents that were known to be Freemasons, maybe 15. We don't know for sure about Thomas Jefferson, right? 14 of them. Last one, most people, I asked this question on there, can you name the last Masonic president? Well, it was Gerald Ford, right? There hasn't been a Masonic president since. In fact, I know of very few Masons that have been in any positions of prominence in any presidential administration since then. But then I like to point out that it may be that 14 American presidents were Freemasons, but 23 of the presidents were Episcopalians. That's a fact. So maybe we should consider that if there's some grand conspiracy, it's not the Freemasons, it's got to be those Episcopalians, right? I say that facetiously, of course, but I make that point. If you wanted to build a conspiracy theory, yeah, you could do that. You could go, hey, it's the Episcopalians are behind. They're the grand puppet masters. And we know that because there was 23 of them that were American presidents. I didn't mean to go off into that sideline, but I think it's important. And I want people to know that the whole tradition of sacred geometry. Well, think about this. Most people are going to know the icon, the symbol that represents the craft. And what is it? It's the square, it's the compasses, and it's the letter G. What do you think the letter G stands for? Obviously, well, yes, people would say God, and in a way it does, but it's geometry, right? Because they're the symbol of the craft is telling you this is what we're about. We're about preserving these ancient traditions of geometry until such time as the world can again find ways to make beneficial use of these ancient principles, which are universal. Okay, so that's my little diatribe there about that, because it's important to know the history. And we can go back. We can go back to the Egyptians. We can go back to the Sumerians, the Solomonic temple builders. There was a group called the Dionysian artificers that bridged the gap between the Solomonic temple builders of roughly 1000 BC, and they were responsible for using the geometry and the astronomy to design and build all of the beautiful Greek temples. And then when Rome came to prominence, a lot of those secrets were passed on to a group called the Roman Collegium, who designed, again, the Roman temples and so on. Then, with the collapse of the Roman Empire around between 400 and 500 AD, a lot of this knowledge got passed on to a group that took refuge on an island in the Lake Como in Italy. And they were called the Comachines, and they preserved a lot of that knowledge until the Middle Ages. Now, one of the things that was associated with the collapse of Rome was the onset of the Dark Ages, right? And you had between 536, the year 536 is considered to be the coldest year of the last entire 2,000 years. And it was followed by a decade of extreme cold weather and the planet was shrouded in darkness, probably because of a combination of several cosmic impacts and several big volcanic eruptions. Well, what happened was you had 10 years of agricultural failures. That led to famine. Famine led to people having weakened immune systems. Those weakened immune systems then allowed opportunistic disease, and you had a form of the bubonic plague. It's usually called the Justinian plague, that swept over Europe in about and the Middle East in about 542 A.D. And that was followed by 300 years of basically very, very hard times. And then when the climate began to warm again between 900 and 1000 AD, crops began to proliferate in the field again, population grew, um, childhood mortality decreased. Then you had a century and a half of prosperity because of the warm weather, prosperity. Population grew to the point where now you could actually viably undertake this tremendous, magnificent enterprise of building these great Gothic cathedrals, see? And then when the climate got cold again at the beginning of the Little Ice Age, in the early 1300s, you had the same repeat again, the agricultural collapses, people went hungry. The bubonic plague, also called the Black Plague, swept over Europe, and that was the end. And then it was several centuries of recovery. And then there was a little break in the Little Ice Age where the warmth came back, and that coincides with the Renaissance. And then it got cold again, and now we're in a warm period. It's cyclical. And interestingly, the frequency of those cycles can actually be correlated, and I show this in my lectures and workshops, with the frequencies that correlate to the forms of sacred geometry. So again, those numbers measure not only spatial relationships, but temporal or relationships in time as well. And this to me is where it gets so fascinating. When we and I see that kind of almost as the basis of ancient prophecy. See, think about this. If imagine that everybody in your country or everybody in the world, some aliens came down and they beamed a ray down on us and everybody forgot and your memory only went back 3 months, right? So now, but let's say there was a few people that for whatever reason were immune to that forgetfulness ray. And let's say they did this in July. Now, if you go back, or June, and now if your memory only goes back 3 months, you're going to be back in spring. And what you're going to see is that each day, each week, as the weeks go by, the world's getting warmer and warmer and warmer. But you're not going to know about winter, are you? If your memory only goes back 3 months. But somebody whose memory goes back further and they understand the cosmic cycles can say, well, you know, this nice warm weather, it's not going to last. It's going to turn cold again, and you're going to get this stuff called snow falling out of the sky, and et cetera, and they'll go get out of here. Well, I think the core of prophecy is that you understand the much larger grand cycles in which all of our day to day and year to year activity is embedded. And so prophecy to me is really just having access to the bigger picture of temporal change. But those cycles of temporal change are governed by the cosmological numbers, which we learn about through these hands on operations of creating these geometric forms and patterns. Within those forms and patterns, to use a modern terminology, we might refer to this relationship between part and whole as fractal self-similarity. It's almost the same principle. You know, in geology, which is one of my passions, if you're looking at a geological textbook or an article in a journal or something, and they're talking about some specific outcrop, you'll always see something in that picture to provide scale. Typically, you know, if it's not huge, the geologist will put their rock pick into the scene for scale. It could be, you know, the hat. It could be, it could be even their cell phone, something that people are going to recognize, because in geology, you've got this scale invariant phenomenon, and you might look at a picture and you go, okay, am I looking at something here that's 6 feet high or 600 feet high or 60 feet high? So if it's 60 feet high, you're probably not going to have a rock pick. You're probably going to have somebody standing in the picture to give you the sense of scale. Why? Because of this self-similarity of geological features. Well, in geometry, that's one of the things we're looking for. Because we want to understand in any design, if we're trying to achieve harmony, which in the Greek was harmonia, what that was the relationship between the pattern of the whole and each of the elements making up the whole. that they're not just random, that there is a type of geometric relationship between those. So this is one of the fundamental things that we learn in a workshop is we'll start out just by drawing a rectangle. And that rectangle, well, we'll start out by drawing a square. And then we look at the properties of that square and we go, okay, there's, regardless of how big that square is, doesn't matter how big it is, right? From little to big, the relationship between the side length of the square and the length of the diagonal is always going to be consistent. It's going to be invariant, which means doesn't matter the size of the square. That relationship will always be consistent. And that relationship is defined by the square root of 2. And if I hold up my calculator that everybody in the workshop will get, let's turn it on here. Let's clear it out. Let's see if this will, okay, you can see I've got a 0 up there, right? It's a little bit blurry, but hopefully you can see it. Then right here, this key right here, square root of x. So if I want to know what's the square root of a particular number, I can pick a number and I can go, what's the square root of 36? So I'm going to put 36 in the calculator, and then I'm going to just hit square root. And you'll see that it's 6, right? Now, in the terms of a square, and this is, we call it squaring, and you'll see why. Again, we explain that in the retreat, right? Now, if you take the side of a square is 1, which is always when you're working out these relationships, always work whenever possible with the simplest numbers. Well, simplest numbers is 1, the integer, integral unit 1, right? So if the side of your square is 1, what's the length of the diagonal? Well, what you do is we use the Pythagorean theorem, and about the third time, if you have no mathematical background, I promise you, within about 3 times, you'll see how to use it. It's ultra simple. I know some of you out there are going to be mathematically literate, so bear with me, but it's represented by the formula a squared plus b squared equals c squared, where a and b are the 2 legs of any right triangle, and c is the hypotenuse of that right triangle. Well, what this formula is telling us is that if I have a triangle that's got one right angle of 90 degrees, I draw a square on one leg, I draw a square on the other leg. If I add those 2 together in area, it's going to be exactly the same as the area drawn on the hypotenuse, right? Super useful, but very simple mathematical relationship there. Well, so what you do is you square one side, you square the other side, add them together, and that's the square of the hypotenuse. Well, if your square is 1 on a side, now I draw the diagonal in and I split it down the middle, and that square becomes a right triangle, right? What's 1 times 1? When I'm saying I'm squaring a number, that means you're just multiplying that number times itself. 1 times 1 is 1. The other side, 1 times 1 is 1. Add those two together, and even the most mathematically illiterate person that I've ever met can add 1 plus 1 and get 2. Now, is that the length of the diagonal? No, it's not the length. It's the area of the square. So what you have to do is you have to get the square root of 2. And then if you want to know that, you just like go back to your calculator and you put in 2. Wait, does that 5? Yeah, 2. When I look at it backwards, here it's a 5. Okay, and then you just hit the square root button, and you get that 1.414213562, and the square root of 2, like pi, it's an irrational number. It goes on forever. It never repeats. It never terminates. It goes on forever. But you don't need to worry about that. We've got this calculator, and I didn't have these calculators back in the Middle Ages or back in Egypt, so they had to use other methods. But we will go ahead, because we're in the 21st century, we'll use a calculator to get that. So any carpenter knows the 12 to 17 rule, because you're always, or builder, any carpenter or builder, an operative mason with a trowel laying up bricks or blocks or stone knows this relationship, right? So It's called the 12-17 rule. Why is that? Well, because if you have a square that's 12 inches on a side, watch this now. I'll go to my calculator. I'll put 12. You can see I've got 12 there. Yep. Okay. So then what I'm going to do now is I'm going to multiply that times 2 square root equals, and look what it comes up to, 16.97. 16.970. Well, you can see that's almost 17. And for practical use, like if you're building a house, well, being within 3/1000ths of an inch, yeah, it's probably going to be acceptable, right? Typically, when you're a framing carpenter is working to 1/8 of an inch, which is much bigger than 3/1000. So you can see that in round numbers, 16.97 is almost 17. So when you're on the building site using that relation 17 to 12 um, is close enough, and that's one of the basic rules you use over and over and over again. So, anyways, because of the fact that I'm trying to make this a practical tool, I want people to learn these ways to make it practical. Then, in perhaps like in the Sunday night lecture, we'll get into some of the deeper symbolical and philosophical and mystical, if you will, components of it, because that's where it really does get interesting then. Um, but this is only beginning workshop. Like I said, I did a series with one group. We met one weekend a month, and we did this actually for over a year to really get up to the advanced material. So my goal is to use this as a sort of a launch pad um, and get a group of dedicated students who really want to get into this and help bring it back to the world because the world needs this kind of information. Um, and that would be followed at some point by, I'll call it an intermediate. And generally, what we do is we don't really get into learning too much about the three-dimensional geometry in the basic levels because the basic levels is we want to learn um, in the beginning levels we need to learn the basics,
Mm.
just how to set out, all the fundamental relationships. Then we get into the more elaborate patterns and diagrams and drawings and things, exploring lots of different incarnations, whether it's molecular geometry, whether it's the geometry of a flower, the geometry of a cathedral or a pyramid, or relationships, let's say the geometry of the solar system. So, Beckett, looks like you've got
Yeah, when and where is the workshop, Randall?
the workshop is going to be in Tennessee on the Cumberland Plateau. It's Beersheba Springs Assembly. Let's see, I did have here the actual, oh, here, let's see. So people want to find out more, go to howtube.com/RCSG.
And this is going to be both in person and live streamed?
Yes, yeah. So if you can't make it, I mean, yeah, it's going to be live streamed, and you'll be able to download the whole workshop, and then you'll have it in perpetuity.
How many
And
how
then,
many seats in person are there?
well, we'd like to get 54 seats filled, and we're getting close. So I don't expect that we're going to have. Um,
Yeah,
well, let's see.
I think there's less than 20 seats left now. Let me look. Yeah, it looks like there's 17 tickets left for in person there.
If we get a big demand, we could kick it up a little bit. I think. I mean, based on room. So when we do a lecture, like the Friday night lecture, will be in a smaller room where people will be in chairs. But then when we shift over the next morning to the drawing exercises, we're sitting at tables. So we have to have tables set up. Um, I think there's enough room in there that we could add another table or two. So we'll see how that's going to
Yeah.
work out. Um,
Yeah, and right now I think there's the code you sent was a 20% discount. Is that correct? 20% discount?
Yes, let's see here. So, anybody listening to this using this code, and you're going to provide the code, right?
Yeah.
SG8640.
Yep.
Hey, look
Codes
at
are in the
there.
chat.
The SG, the code number's 8640. What a coincidence. Oh, and then the live stream code is 4320. Ah, what a coincidence. Okay, so what's happening here is you're going to get a $72 discount if you use this code on the live stream. Now, that's a hell of a deal. You know, excuse me, I didn't mean to say that word, but it's a heck of a good deal because um, it includes, I think, 8 meals. It also includes this package of all the supplies and equipment you need that's worth like 140 bucks, right? Which you get to, you keep that. So then if you decide to go on with your studies in the subject and we hold a second level retreat, you've already got the supplies. You've got everything you need and the instruction of how to use them. Now for the live stream,
So
90
the
bucks.
what did you say it was? So for the in-person ticket, the price for this live stream is what? 720? Is that what you said?
No, no, no. That's for the in-house seats.
In-house seats. Got it. In-house seats is $720, and that is only for the next 24 hours, I believe.
Yes. And then for the live stream, we're dropping it from 90 to 72 bucks.
And somebody was asking about lodging in the chat for in-person.
Okay, so for in person, I mean, we have a we have a group of rooms reserved, and you know, and there's a variety of different, you know, if you're coming with a spouse or a partner, or you're by yourself or whatever. It got a little complicated to try to have rooms reserved. What they've done is they've reserved a block of rooms for us. Each person who's going to stay, you'll call and you'll work that out directly with the people at Beersheba, and they're really nice people, and it's really their fees are definitely affordable, like $100 a night for a room. Some of our night, and there's different room sizes and different options. So, you know, we didn't know who's coming and who's coming with you know, somebody might is coming with some children, and you know, if you've got married spouses or individuals. So we just said, well, here's the number, and all that contact information is going to be on the website there. So you can, and I think my brother, who's helping to organize, he's provided the phone numbers and the contact information, and they'll be expecting a call, and you just find out the options, and so we're right on the site there. Now you don't have to stay there. I mean, there's a few towns, but you know, I think McMinnville is probably 15, 20 minutes away. Um, so people don't have to stay there. I would highly recommend it because part of these experiences is the community of people and the friendships that are emerging out of these events. Um, the networking and knowing people that are, you know, utilizing these same principles and so on. Uh,
And it's quite a beautiful place, too.
oh yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a beautiful place. It's right up on the. It's on a beautiful overlook. The Cumberland, the history. I made, and we're going to do near there. There's a some interesting geological sites, and on our free time, I think I don't know if myself or my brother or some of the other people are going to lead some little hikes over to some of these geological sites of interest during the spare time. I think maybe on Saturday. But yeah, it's a beautiful place. Regrettably, the spring is no longer active because what was it? If I remember, the 1940s, they built a road from the valley floor down below
Hmm.
up to the plateau surface. And somehow, when they built that road, they severed the spring. It's still there somewhere, but they nobody knows quite where it ended up. Um, but that's too bad because springs are always something that's associated with sacred sites, and I think there's a reason for that, an energetic reason. We won't probably get into that too much, but you know, this is
Don't tease us with it, Randall. Give us something.
well, you know, I like to tease. I've always been, you know, look, I grew up with four brothers, so teasing was endemic to our whole youthful experience.
Well,
But
let them know. You'll tell them if they come to the retreat.
there we go. I'll tell them if they come to the retreat. Yes, but it is all part of the ancient system, which began, and we'll probably talk about that. Some I talk about this in a lot of the podcasts and stuff I do. Um, it began with what we call the geomantic mapping, which is finding and mapping the energy patterns on the site, which are going to be related to the type of bedrock, type of the composition of the bedrock, whether there's fractures or fault lines, whether there's underground water moving, whether there are springs, whether there's overground water, what type of soil. All of this contributes to the subtle energy fields of a particular site. And some of these are definitely mappable. I've um, talked about geomancy, which is a traditional way of divining. It's like water divining is an outgrowth of this system, and I've seen there's a lot of skepticism out there amongst you know the rational scientists, but I've seen it work. I've known professional dowsers. I've seen professional dowsers at work. Um, so I know that there's something to it. And I couldn't necessarily explain I have ideas about what the science of it might be. And we may get into that. I don't know how much time we'll have for a level one retreat, but when the ancients went to establish the first thing they did was establish the sacred precinct, which would be this geomantic mapping. And they had ways of detecting, for example, if water is moving through a fault line, which is typically if you've got a fracture or a fault line, that's going to be the conduit for water moving through the bedrock. Well, that moving water creates fields that can actually be measured. So I think there's a direct connection between the geomagnetic field and a more subtle energy pattern of a landscape. But that was whatever the scientific explanation ends up being. The first stage of the working was establishing this geomantic map. Then from that, they would establish the sacred center, which, um, in the Greeks, they referred to it as the omphalos. It was the naval center. And it was from that center, that sacred center, that the temple or the sacred building, the cathedral, the whatever it might be, would grow from that sacred center according to the ratios of geometry and oriented towards the celestial movements. So all of those things were incorporated into this system. And you find it repeated all over the world. Like, I probably in April might be doing a tour to Chaco Canyon. And we would look at some of how the Chaco Canyon was the center of a complex that covered over 10,000 square miles of the San Juan Basin. And there were radial lines emanating out from Chaco Canyon, the hub, towards the celestial, mapping the celestial movements. And then over along those alignments, there were raised prominences where there were signal towers. And so the remnants of those signal towers are still there. But in some cases, it might just be in an embedded layer of charcoal where they built these enormous fires and they had a system of communication that could integrate the entire San Juan Basin. And the center of this whole system was at Chaco Canyon at Casa Bonito, where there was a signal tower. Now, if anybody in here is a fan of the Lord of the Rings movies, there was a very impressive scene in there. I think it was in Return of the King, where who was it? Was it the hobbits? I've forgotten. Are going up to ignite the signal tower, the fire, and then it's seen on the next mountaintop, and then it's seen on the next mountaintop. Well, that isn't something that was just conjured up out of J.R.R. Tolkien's imagination. Ancient peoples really did that. We find the evidence of signal towers in Europe. We find them in the UK. We find them in the eastern United States. We find them, like I was talking about, in the San Juan Basin of New Mexico. So, and reaching up into Colorado, there's a place in southern Colorado called Chimney Rock. And it's these two great piers of rock, right? And there's a ridge leading up to. I've taken like 3 or 4 groups up there on sacred tours, if you want to call them that. You go up this ridge, and you get up to the ridge, and there's a remnant of a kiva up there, and there's a remnant of a signal tower that was up on this ridge. That signal tower could be seen when you lit a bonfire there. That signal tower could be seen like almost 40 miles to the south. It could not be seen from Chaco Canyon, but there was El Faro, they called it, the lighthouse. There was a prominence that was 12 miles north of the rim of Chaco Canyon with a signal tower. And from that signal tower, you could see Chimney Rock 40 miles to the north, you see.
Mm-hmm.
And there was, we don't know how many there were, but there was probably at least a dozen or more. And somebody once did an experiment using lasers. And I would love to, that was like 20 years ago or something. I'd love to try to replicate that using high powered laser signals from these various prominences, from these signal towers, too.
Maybe we can make it happen in April.
It would require a little planning
A little
and
bit.
I mean, we could send somebody up to Chimney Rock in Colorado, and we could, I actually went looking for El Faro on one of our trips. I couldn't find it. I did found out that it was on private land that was owned by a Native American rancher. I think he was Apache. I don't remember. Maybe he might have been Zuni. I don't remember. This has been a while. But yeah, he said, and I got his contact information. He said, yeah, I know where that is. If you come back, I can take you out there. So, but I don't think we can pull that off.
Yeah, maybe not that soon. Well, Randall, we got some people who have been building up some questions in the chat here that I want to
Yeah, let's
ask
go
you.
for it. Let's go for it.
Okay, so we had a question earlier on from Kim Jong Un, and he said, "Why do we live in such a calm period of time? Did we miss all the major geological events or cosmic events?"
What was the first one? Why do we live in what?
Such a calm period of time.
Oh, well, we're in one of those intervals. I mean, this is what is the defining characteristic of the Holocene, which is the current geological epoch. And what's different from this in the preceding couple of 100,000 years? Well, there must be multiple factors, but we do live in a quiescent time, a calm time compared to what has gone before. I think most of the listeners here are going to have heard of the uh, excuse me one second. What? Yeah, I got it. Okay, so why are we in this period called the Holocene, which is 11,600 years old now, just recently defined, which is the top of this interval called the Younger Dryas. And I think most people listening here have probably heard now of the Younger Dryas. When I first started lecturing about it 15, 20 years ago, nobody had, what are you talking about, the Younger Dryas? So it's gratifying to me that I actually see people online now discussing the Younger Dryas, knowing that 20 years ago nobody had ever heard of what was the Younger Dryas. Well, the Younger Dryas was a period of very rapid climate and environmental change. And it lasted roughly 1,300 years, and it started just somewhat younger than 12,900 years ago, and then it ended abruptly about 11,600 years ago. And one of the things that defined the end of the Younger Dryas was a very rapid melting of the great ice sheets, which would then be accompanied with a very rapid rise of sea level, right? And that's now the defining point of transition from the Pleistocene, which was almost 2.5 million years in length, and the Holocene, which is just over 11,000, about 11,600 years. Now, we are in a period called the interglacial, right? For the last couple of 100,000 years, there has been this very extreme swinging back and forth between glacial and interglacial. What is driving that is an open question. We need a lot more scientific studies to try to really define what is driving these enormous climate changes and environmental changes. But the upshot of it is at the end of it, what we see is the great megafauna that inhabited the earth. This spectacular, great mammalian megafauna that inhabited the earth went mysteriously extinct in a geological snap of the finger. They were gone. Um, Most people don't realize that North America, North America had 4 species of elephants. You know, when you think of elephants, you think Africa, right? Don't you? You think Serengeti Plain of Africa. You think India. The world today has 2 species of elephants, the Indian elephant and the African elephant. They're very distinguished. Uh, you know, you can look at them and you can easily, once you've learned, you can easily tell the difference between them. Well, there was the imperial mammoth, there was the Columbian mammoth, the woolly mammoth, and there were mastodons. They were all proboscideans, meaning they had the long trunks. They all lived in North America, right? More species of elephants in North America than Africa, which has 1 species, right? What happened to them? Well, they all disappeared right around the Younger Dryas. Something happened there. And why? Well, I think it's 2 things. Ultimately, I think our planetary system is part of a cosmic ecosystem, and changes on the cosmic level translate downward and manifest as changes down here in the terrestrial level. I think that, in fact, right now, did you hear about this today? There's the Webb telescope is going to be redeployed, emergency.
No, I didn't hear that.
2032, there's I think a 2.7 chance that we could get smacked by an
Oh,
asteroid.
yeah. Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, now that's the highest odds of a impact predicted that in my lifetime, and it's at least as big as the Tunguska object of 1908, and it could be bigger.
Hmm.
Depends on, you know, we need more observation, so they're gonna do an emergency reorientation of the Webb telescope to try to look at it and discern exactly how big the thing is. Um, I mean, if it's, let's say, the size of Tunguska, that is what we would call a city buster impact. It's about equivalent to the power of a 15 megaton hydrogen bomb, which could destroy any metropolitan area on Earth, right? Any urban area would get wiped out with a 15 megaton hydrogen bomb. This thing could be actually many times bigger than Tunguska. We don't know yet, but hopefully these Webb observations will determine 2 things: its size, and as it gets closer to 2032, what are the odds of an impact? Now, when I first heard of this, it had a 1% chance. Now that's been revised upwards to, I think, to 2.7% chance.
Wrong direction.
Wrong direction, right? But you know, I've said for years, it's probably going to take another Tunguska to snap so many millions of people out of their hypnotic trance to look at the big picture, which is what we're trying to do with the big picture podcast that we're doing. That's why we're calling it the big picture. We're going to try to, you know, leverage people up into this broader perspective of the bigger cosmic environment of which we are a part, and we can't escape that. Now, it's my belief that many of the other things, such as uh, big earthquakes, volcanic activity, geomagnetic field fluctuations, all of that, climate changes could be related and ultimately triggered by hypervelocity impacts.
Yeah.
And, you know, I talked about this last June. There was a 600 to 800 foot asteroid that just scraped by the Earth, came well within the orbit of the moon, cosmic whisker, slightly different trajectory. That thing could have slammed into the Earth. If it had been into the oceans, which is about 3 out of every 4 impacts are going to be into oceans, it could have created tidal waves, or tsunamis rather, that could have been 100 feet high when they made landfall. You know, 4 times the height of the Indonesian um, tsunami of 2004. Now that would be extremely devastating. Now, if it hit on the other thing is it would loft billions of tons of water vapor into the atmosphere that, depending on wind direction and so on, would rain back out. And,
Right.
you know, if it landed in the Atlantic, most likely you're going to have huge water vapor moving over Europe, and the rain out would cause just extreme flooding. Now, if it hit on land, it's going to gouge a crater 2.5 miles wide and 1,500 feet deep, right? With
Yeah.
some variation depending on the substrate, the composition of the land, the target material, the angle of approach. The angle affects things because the steeper the angle, the more atmosphere it has to pass through. So that's going to kind of have a braking effect. And it means it's the asteroid is going to dump more of its energy into the atmosphere. But that's certainly in the range. 2.5 miles wide, 1,500 feet deep. Now, I'm going to assume that some of the people here, and in fact, if we do the field trip we're looking at doing in April, one of the sites we would visit would be Meteor Crater near
Right.
Winslow, Arizona, which is a kilometer wide, which is about 3,300 feet wide and 600 feet deep. Well, this thing that just missed the Earth, barely missed the Earth in June, would have made a crater 1,500 feet deep and 2.5 miles wide. The fireball from that impact would have been 3 miles wide. Now, one of the things I like to do with classes and students and stuff is we do map work, and I'll tell people, let's do this. Take a map of where you live in your house, and put a marker there, and then draw a radius. Like I've done this for Tunguska. Draw a radius out to 20 miles, right, and draw a circle, right. Now, 15 megaton bomb detonated at your house would destroy everything within that circle. Now, you've got your map. Actually, take that map and go out and drive that distance, right? And imagine that everything is destroyed. This is how you can get it in your head. Now, for the fireball is 3 miles wide. Go imagine that the impact is on your house. That means you have to draw a radial line 1.5 miles. Now, go out and drive 1.5 miles and think that everything within that circle is completely incinerated, right? That's what we're talking about if this thing in June had hit on land, right?
Mm.
The fireball, literally, if it landed, if this thing hit in a highly populated area, more than 1 million people would be instantly incinerated. Now, it would then, the shock wave would move out from there, knocking buildings over out to 20 miles more. An earthquake, a major earthquake that would be felt 40 miles or more away. The, the sound, the sound from the explosion itself would kill people up to like 10 miles away.
Yeah.
That's how loud it is. Um, and that thing just missed us last June, and nobody noticed it. Nobody hardly, it came and it went. And you know what? This is happening often. This happens, we get something flying by in our cosmic neighborhood about once a month. And I've been saying for years, sooner or later, we're going to discover something, and it's going to be on an impact for us. Are we ready? Are we prepared? No, we're not. We could be. Oh, absolutely, we could be. We could be ready to deal with something like this, to handle it. But we're not ready because everybody's like here. You know, nobody's looking at the big picture. Nobody sees the night sky hardly anymore. We're going to change that. We want to bring young people out, old people. We want people to come out, recognize, to learn to read the sky.
Yeah.
Because there's a great epic story that is juxtaposed onto the sky, and nobody better than a good friend of mine that comes on a lot of our tours. He has done amazing work, and we'll be talking about his work a little bit during the retreat. But anyways, so all of this stuff is intertwined. There is a cyclical component to this, I do believe,
Yeah.
and we have been in a period of tremendous change. We've been given a little window of opportunity here, 10,000 years or so, to pick up the pieces in the aftermath of the Younger Dryas to build a new civilization, a higher civilization. And I want to go forward because I believe that there's a cosmic mandate that's life itself, which came from the cosmos to this outpost, this terrestrial outpost, where every condition, everything is just optimally proportioned. We have a moon to create an intertidal zone. We have all of the components. We're just far enough from the sun. We're just of the right size. Again, all of this is defined by the sacred geometry of our solar system. That all the parameters are like perfectly tuned for you and me and all of the people listening in tonight to sit here and participate in this. The reason we're doing this is why? Because we have relay satellites. No such thing
Exactly. Yeah.
existed when I came into the world at the mid 20th century. None of that existed. We had no presence in space, right? I believe that the mandate of life itself is that it wants to become once again expand into the cosmos, and humans are the agency of doing this. And we're already seeing, by coincidence, that some of the schemes for creating worlds in space are actually just externalizations of the very principles of sacred geometry. And we'll look at some of that.
And there's a podcast coming out tomorrow night where we went deep on this.
Is that tomorrow night?
Yeah, it drops tomorrow night. Speaking of young people, there is a 14-year-old listening in. His name is Talon.
Hi,
If you
Talon.
if you had any messages for a message for young people, Talon specifically, age of 14, who are interested in sacred geometry and the things you talk about, what would you say?
Well, I would say, Talon, you're living during some really interesting times, exciting times. Uh, there's some danger to our times, but I think I'm an optimist, so I think we're going to work our way through this, and it's going to be the next few decades could be extremely exciting times. Um, when I was 14, that would have been 1965, and we were just really getting into the space program. And I was really excited about the space program. And I followed that. And when Neil Armstrong landed on the moon in 1969, I was 18 years old then. And I thought, at that time mistakenly thought that I was going to grow up into a world where we had, we had already made missions to Mars, that maybe we were going to get to a point where we were beyond war, because once we start moving into space, you got to understand that the resources, both material and energy resources of space, are infinite. They're infinite, right? We don't need to have wars on Earth fighting over a diminishing supply, a finite supply of resources, because all we need to do is we need to just take that leap out. And now we have access to the infinite resources of space. And interestingly, here's something that's kind of ironic in my mind. We've got a very dangerous asteroid now we don't know how close it's going to come to Earth in 2032. And it's good that we're noticing it, and it may force us to take remedial measures if we discover that it's, 1 in 20 or 1 in 10 chance of hitting the Earth. We're going to have to act as an international community. And that's what needs to happen right now. I think that we have to transcend these differences that have kept us apart for decades and centuries. And basically, all wars and conflicts are fought over resources or space. And I give great detailed lectures on that, on the history of conflict and warfare and how it's related to environmental change and population expansion and contraction and the competition for resources and so on. So I'm not going to get into that tonight because we're running out of time here. But we have a tremendous opportunity. I wish I was, what I wish? Wish I knew what it was. I wish I knew what I know now, and I was 14 years old. Boy, that would be awesome. Because, hey, man, you might be the guy who goes and helps establish an international outpost on the moon. You might be going to visit some of the first space colonies that we're building, that we could be building, and should have actually already been building if we'd kept up the momentum of the Apollo program. But I
Yeah.
think it's exciting time, and I would say, I'm kind of envious to be 14 years old again. I'd be interested. what was his name again? It
His
was
name's Talon.
Talon. Yeah, Talon. I wonder where does Talon live?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure where Talon lives, but his dad sent a chat and said, "I'm grateful for you and yourself with sharing of so much wisdom." His dad's name is Trevor.
Okay.
He said, "Be well, friend."
Oh, thanks. Well, I hope you guys can do the, if not the retreat, do the live stream, and then become a part of this growing community, this growing, I say, university or city of the universe. Um, because I think that there's really a need and a demand for this kind of knowledge now. It's integrative knowledge. It shows us the interconnections between all these diverse things that are part of creation, part of our reality, and that's what we need. And it transcends the secular differences, the ethnic differences, the religious differences, because what we find is ancient peoples all over the world of different religious beliefs and stuff all had this investment in this traditional system. And how did that come to be? That's a mystery in itself. Um, but yeah, so
Well, Randall, for the sake of time here, we've got, looks like we have one, two, three more super chats of questions that I want to make sure we get through.
okay.
And then I think what we should do is maybe either you pull up some slides and show some stuff if you're up for it, or we
Sure.
pull up the or we pull up the landing page and kind of walk through the final details of the retreat.
Well, we
And
could do a few slides, and we'll save that. We'll do another. Uh, I don't know if we do a live stream or recorded version. I just my graphics card messed up this morning, and so I ended up 4 or 5 hours trying to work out what's going on. So I have my nice array, my three monitors set up, and one of my monitors is blind right now,
yeah.
and so it's put a little bit of a limitation. I should have this fixed by tomorrow, so we could do. I wanted to take people through, because at the retreat we're going to be doing the classical methods, the hands-on, compass, straight edge on drawing paper. But I wanted to show people who are somewhat familiar with digital graphic design programs how we would use that, and actually take through using several drawings as examples. Take through. Here's how we could use a CAD program if you're an architect or a designer. My CAD program is very much like Paint Photoshop.
Hmm.
A little bit different, but I figure anybody who's familiar with graphical design programs could adapt the principles. So I wanted to show a few examples of how I would do this, how I would design using a digital medium.
Yeah, so it's something for people to look forward to on this once you get that screen fixed.
Hopefully that's tomorrow.
Hopefully. Okay. All right. Well, let me rattle off some of these questions
Okay,
for
all
you
right.
here. Um, okay. Regarding gravity or neutrino condensate's flux, I'm quite certain the full moon disrupts this flux.
Ah,
Seems to be something similar with respects to Saturn and its moons, Tethys and Mimas. Ideas, dates, question mark?
question mark. I would have to know more. This, it sounds like one. Sounds interesting. Okay. I know the moon is playing a very critical role. Now, on what level? That's on a subatomic level. Why not? Um, I have no opinion on that because I haven't considered that. But if you've got a paper you've written or could send some references where I could kind of do a little background research, I'd be very interested in that.
Yeah, the screen name for this on YouTube is Darius Kaysen. So Darius, if you can send some resources through the website, you can fill out the form there, or send us a DM on Instagram or Twitter.
Okay.
Okay, so the last super chat question that we have here is, what would happen geometrically if a torus is rolled on its face on a plane inside of a sphere of mirrors slash reflection?
Okay. I mean, a torus. Let's go
A
through that
torus,
again.
okay, so a torus is rolled on its face Okay. On a plane inside of a sphere of mirrors. Okay, so we've got a sphere of mirrors, and a torus is rolled onto its
So
face
the mirrors
inside of
are
it.
on the inside of the sphere,
I would assume so, yes.
and
I
the
think
torus
he's
is rolling inside the sphere.
I think he's and Winona Riders, if I'm saying this incorrectly, fix us in the chat. Oh, this is his full question. What would happen geometrically if a torus is rolled on its face on a plane inside a sphere of mirror/reflection? Take into account electromagnetism and entanglement properties in this scenario. So let's just say that we've got a sphere, and inside of the sphere there's a plane, and the torus is rolled onto its face. That's the part that I'm not quite getting.
I'm not quite getting that on its face. Is the face?
Is the face, would that be like the 0 point, I guess, on the plane like this? Or if this is the plane, we've got a 0 point through the torus here. Is that what you're saying? I don't know. I'm not seeing it in the chat. We're probably a little bit on a delay here. But if you see this, let us know, and we'll come back to it. Here it is. The stretching and breaking, it's rolling inwards and creating knots and breaking. I don't know. We'll have to unpack that one at a different time. I'm not
Yeah,
getting it.
yeah. It's an interesting question. Um, I don't know. I mean, I know what a sphere is. I know what a torus is. I can imagine a torus inside a sphere. Now we get beyond that. When it's rolling in its mirrors, I mean, I'm going to have to process that before I can make any effort at any kind of an educated answer to that.
Yeah, it'll be a fun visualization process. Maybe we'll come back next week with something there. Okay, Randall, well, do you want to share a couple slides and
Oh,
maybe
sure.
show that drawing exercise?
Let's see if we can do that.
Okay, so while Randall's pulling that up, guys, he, just to be very, very clear, there is currently a total of, I think, 17 or 16 in-person seats left, 17 in-person seats left for the retreat. And the discount code that you see us sending in the chat, this is only active for tonight. This is going to be off in 24 hours. So if you're interested in going, then make sure you get your tickets. If you can't make it in person, then there is the live stream, and the discount code for that is also only active for tonight. And that's discounted to $72 for the live stream. And then for the in-person, you're getting Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and it ends on Monday. All included in that, there's 8 meals, there's 10 hours of classroom time, you get all the supplies, you get the whole community, you get to hang out with Randall. Randall was talking about shenanigans at night, something about him singing and dancing or something. Isn't that right, Randall?
No, I don't think I mentioned the word singing or dancing, but I did mention some drumming.
Oh, that's what it
You
was.
know, I've been a percussionist for, quite a while. I used to play in a band. I was a percussionist in a band, and I studied uh, Middle Eastern trance drumming. With dervish trance drumming. So the idea would be, like Saturday night, we put everybody into a trance, and then I,
You
uh,
gotta you gotta finish that statement. You put him in a trance, and then what?
and
I
then
guess,
what?
and then he guess you have to show up to know.
Yeah. Well, no, you are in my power. Somebody once accused me of that. I said, look, I'm like the last thing I'm interested in is being a guru. That's not what this is about. This isn't about me. This is about learning this. This is about the knowledge, and I'm why I don't say this, any definitive explanations. I just, here it is. I will suggest what I've learned about it, what I might believe about it, but ultimately make up your own mind. A big part of geometry is the development of your reasoning power. It's not about giving up your reasoning power, it's about learning to critical thinking. And geometry um, is really one of the most powerful ways of developing your reasoning ability, your intellectual prowess. And, you know, I, really, people ask me, well, what's the difference between sacred geometry and regular, like Euclidean geometry? And the answer is, well, Euclidean sacred geometry is every bit as rigorous as Euclidean geometry, with the definitions, the propositions, the definitions, the axioms, the propositions, the proofs. All of that is there, right? But then there's also this symbolical, this philosophical dimension to it, that and this integrative uh, dimension of it, that we can use it to powerfully see the interconnectedness of things on a way that you don't really explore that in your traditional Euclidean geometry. But you know, don't think that people seen people online. Oh, this Randall Carlson and his sacred geometry woo woo. And I would say, okay, dude, or whoever you are, you show up at one of the workshops for a weekend, and let's see, you know, how much woo you think it is at the end of end of it, because you can only say that if you're appallingly ignorant of the subject, because the subject can get very deep. It can get quite complex if you want to go there. Um, the difference is it becomes now a universal language, because we talked about the relationship of a diagonal to the side of a square. Well, that relation doesn't matter what nationality, what ethnicity, whether you're an atheist, a true believer, what religion, what gender, none of that matters. The relationship of the diagonal of a square to its side is invariable across all the spectrum of diversity of all the aforementioned things that separate us into categories. Those geometrical relationships are constant. They're invariant. And so geometry has provided and can again provide a universal language. And that becomes especially powerful when you understand the symbolical dimension of it. Okay? That squares have a certain meaning, circles have a certain meaning, triangles, etc. So that's kind of what, in my mind, differentiates sacred geometry from regular Euclidean geometry. Although, especially in the introductory workshops, we do explore and learn about those propositions. One of the handouts will be the propositions, and we refer to them regularly because I do teach it as a process of developing your intellectual mind and your reasoning mind to understand. See, it's not only a matter of knowing how you create these. It's not the how, but by itself, it's also the why. Why does this work? And see, if you understand some of that, it gives you a much greater facility for using it as a design tool. See, if because many times, like in my work, I'll encounter constantly unique situations where you have to like think it through. How am I going to make this work? Right? Well, then you go to your toolbox, and in your toolbox, you've got all of these um, definitions and axioms and propositions, and you go, okay, I think I can put this and this together, and I can make this work. See, so it's very much about problem solving. Especially if you're an architect or a builder, which is where I'm coming from, that background. So every project is a whole series essentially of solving problems. So the more you understand about these kinds of things that we're talking about here, the more tools you're going to have that's going to allow you to solve problems, whether they're just very practical day-to-day problems or something on a higher level where you're truly trying to incorporate, um, the harmony into your design. And this is the kind of thing that it's maybe not overtly apparent upon first impression, but it's something that you will respond to on an intuitive or an instinctive level, right? just like, for example, if I go to this, I'm going to, are we seeing my drawing screen yet, my slide? I believe we are. I'm gonna back up here, and this is called the golden spiral, or the spiral of the whirling squares, and it's based on the golden rectangle, right? Now, this was one of the important tools that artists have used to set up the composition of their canvases. So if you're an artist, this is an incredible tool that you can use to really um, come up with. Um, Now, I'm not going to explain what's going on here. These are some of this is an Islamic tile pattern, which is kind of one of the things we learn how to draw. But this golden rectangle right here is sort of like the preeminent um, expression of scale invariance, right? Because the proportions of the whole, the length to width ratio here, okay, is the same as this rectangle right here, which is the same as this rectangle right here. And we can expand this, or we can contract it infinitely to whatever level of precision that we need. So that's, we'll be learning how to draw this, and how to basically use it. But um, that's the thing that we're looking for here, is this relationship between the part and the whole. And it's no better exemplified than in the golden rectangle. And turns out that life itself has utilized the golden rectangle, and we will demonstrate in the class how we are walking embodiments of the geometry of the golden rectangle, we, the human species. Okay? So this was going to be like one of the simplest drawings that we begin with, which is the vesica piscis, which is the overlap of two circles, such that the uh, circumference of one falls on the center of the other. And simply by doing that, we can create a short axis, which we call the line of centers, because it connects the centers of the two circles, and then this rhombic line, which connects the two ends of the vesica. And then from there, we can add a third circle. This is one of the exercises we do in class. And in one of the videos we've put out, I do this whole drawing here with the square and compass. So I think you can find that on the website address that I gave you. But notice that the third circle is centered right here at the south point of the vesica, and from there we can put in the hexagon, and you'll notice again each side of the hexagon is equal to the original radius, right? And this is one of the quite amazing properties that it does this, that the radius of a circle exactly mathematically steps off 6 times around the circumference of the circle. And then if we go to the next level, once we've got this, notice I've got this point here, and I've got this point here. Now in these exercises, we don't do things arbitrarily. Each generation of the drawing, each step within the drawing, creates the potential for the next step, right? So if I back up here, if I go get rid of that, again, notice that I had to put that third circle in, right? I had to put the third circle in to create the new set of points that allows us to take the next step, which is the hexagon. And then we put in that line, and we project that line. This is a projection line. So we go from this point here through this point, and we project it on until it intersects the far side of, we'll call this circle 1 right up here. Then we do it again here, and then we'll do this. So we're defining those 2 points, and then from there we project those lines up, and now right up here we want to get the apex of a pentagon. So notice that the sides of the pentagon are also 1 unit because they're attached at the base right here. So we simply, without changing the setting of our compass, we've done this whole operation here with 1 setting of the compass, right? So now we need to get this intersection point up here, so we utilize this as a center of arc drawing and this as a center. And then there's one, see that, look, if we put our compass here and we swing a little arc up here, then we use this as a center, and voila, there's our pentagon. And this gives us some interesting philosophical and symbolical stuff that we find like
Randall, pull that mic a little bit closer.
from alchemy. Uh, it also gives us, and when we look at this in class, we will be looking at examples of DNA geometry and molecular geometry, because this integration of 5 and 6 is at the basis of the whole DNA molecule. But this is an interesting, this is from alchemy, late Renaissance alchemy. And notice the banner, it says Igni Natura Renovatur Integra, right? Oh, by the way, we've got two of the most important of the occult or symbolical mystical flowers represented here, the five-petaled rhodos, five-petaled, five-petaled rose and the six-petaled lily. And if you're familiar with the tarot deck, look at the card of the magician, which is the second arcanum, and you'll see on his magical table there roses and lilies, and there's a reason for that, which we beyond our discussion tonight. But yeah, so then we'll be exploring some molecular geometry. That's advanced. Let's not go there. So anyways, that's just an example of a drawing. Now, we could actually, let's see if I could do this. Let me close this down here and open my CAD program. Let's see here. Okay, there it is. Okay, come on up here. Yeah, without my
The third monitor, it's making it tough. Well, it
yeah.
sounds like you're bringing the people something special, opening up the CAD program.
Ooh, well, yeah. So, tell you what, let me take off the grid, so we're just working with a clean sheet of paper. And so I'm going to go up here, and you can see this, right? You can see
No,
my
we
tool.
can't. We can't see it right
You
now.
can't see it, so I've got to stop share
I
and
think you,
reshare, I believe.
you stopped the other share already. Just got to reshare.
Reshare. Okay, let's do that. Screen, window. I think this will do it. Let's see.
Boom. We see it. Blank
Oh,
sheet.
excellent. Blank sheet. Okay, so I'm just going to take a random. I'm going to grab this circle tool up here, and then I'm going to go over here down to the subtools, and I'm going to grab this draw a circle about a center. So I'm just going to draw a circle of any arbitrary size. Then I'm going to come over here and I'm going to, you see it snaps right here to the circumference of my first circle. And I'm going to draw another circle, and I'm going to keep going until it snaps to the center. It should snap right there. There it is right there. Oops, that's not quite right. Let's see here. I'm a little disoriented here. I tell you what, I'm going to actually do, let's see if I can do this. So yeah, without my third monitor, I'm a little bit handicapped here. Let me do a copy. I'm just going to do it this way. I'll pull this over and it'll snap right there. Okay, so there we've done a vesica. And this vesica is based upon the two circles that are overlapped by an amount equal to the radius of the circle. Then I'm going to copy either one of these, and I'm going to drag it down this third circle, and I'm going to snap it right there. So there I've got my three circles. Now I'm going to enter in my long axis line and then my short axis line, which is the line of centers. And now I'm set up. I can just draw my line from here. I'm going to go through this point, project it until it meets there and it snaps. Then I'll come back over here. I'll do the same thing. And I click right there so I can project on, because I want it to snap to that point. And I project on, and then it'll snap there. Then I can create any other, I'll grab another copy of this circle, and I will just go up to here, and it should snap to there. I'll make another copy of it. I'll drag it over, and it'll snap there. And now I should be able to do this. Let me grab my line tool. I'll go here and here. I'll come down here, and it should. I've got my angle snap set up. Let's see, that didn't get quite right, but that's okay. Yeah, I guess it is. Should snap right there at 30 degrees, and then across here, and there's my hexagon, and then up here, I would go here to there, to here, and then snap to right there. Boom. Oops. Let me redo that. Yeah, this is not ordinarily the monitor I'm working on here, but one more step, I should be able to get it. Snap. There we go. So there is the pentagon, and let's see if that's gonna. So there it is. So that's the basic steps right there. Now we do that. If you look at the video, I've done a hand drawing of this using this compass and straight edge, and I just now used the digital method. I'm going to try something else here. Let me do this. Let me come up to here with this, and then I'm going to see about putting a fill in here. So if I grab this and bring it over, let's do a fill style, and I'll put a solid pattern in there, something, let's just grab anything here, and I'm going to take that down a little. I'll add it to the custom colors. I'll say OK. OK. So now I can zoom in here, and I'm going to pull this down and snap it right there. And I think I'll put a break in here and pull this over and snap it there, and pull this over and snap it here. So now there's my pentagon. I could actually copy that if I wanted. There's any number of ways you can do this in these programs. I think I'll grab another solid here and bring this up to here, and then I will open that, and I'll put a fill style, and I'll use a somewhat different color. Just let's use a blue here and take it down just so you can contrast the two. Click OK, OK, and then all I need to do is put a break here. I can pull that over and snap it, and I might be a little off, but that's okay. This is just for purposes of demonstration, and I can pull that over to there. Let's zoom in. Yeah, let's get this good. Zoom in and get it precise. There we go. Okay. So there we go. Just like that. Now this is the fundamental geometry of the DNA molecule we've just created right here. And I'll be showing examples of that, other things as well. But so once you learn the techniques of sacred geometry, I mean, it's very easy to transpose that from the classical method to just using your digital and your graphic design software. Now the thing is, though, if you're going to actually use this, and like I said, in the old days, I used to hand draw blueprints. Now it's all digital, right? But ultimately, it starts with an idea in your head. You then digitally recreate it here, and then from there you go out and you create the actual artifact in time and space, whether it's a house, a temple, a quilt, a window, a piece of furniture, whatever it might be. I use sacred geometry. You can't see it really, but let's see if you can. because one of the things I thought that I would do is you can see I've got an octagon table there with an inlaid wood pattern, and it's all laid out according to sacred geometry. And I was thinking that one of the things I do, it's an interesting exercise in itself. Um, I thought what I would do was show how it's actually the Cosmographia logo. In fact, uh, well, I don't have one handy here, but I'm showing how I use geometry to create the Cosmographia logo. And I thought that would be an interesting sample and to draw that digitally and show how I did that. Now this is just one sample. I can see already it's a little off here. Let's see. Let's fix that because I like precision. That needs to come over here. There we go. That's better.
You're not sharing anymore, Randall.
Oh well. Okay. So nobody saw the little discrepancy. There
No, they
was a
didn't.
little discrepancy. I caught it and I fixed it. And the cool thing about, well, when you're hand drawing, we're going to have a couple of pencil sharpeners there. And we provide the drawing pencils, by the way. That's part of your supply kit. So I encourage everybody regularly sharpen your pencils. You want nice, sharp pencils when you're doing the drawings, just like when you're doing the digital here. Uh, you can zoom in and get really precise. And if you know how to set up your snapping functions, like I'll set up with whatever angles I need at the beginning, snapping at 30, 45, the obvious ones. But then if I have some other unusual angles, I'll set those up so I can default um, to that angle if I want, and it'll snap to it. Um, so yeah, uh, it's it's uh,
Exciting stuff.
it's a lot of fun to me. I love sitting down here doing this stuff. I designed this restaurant. That was the last major design project. I've got another one I'm about to embark upon. Um, so I designed this restaurant, and it turned out that the footprint of the restaurant was close to a Route 2 rectangle. So I was able to incorporate, I always look for that. This was an existing building, right? So we had to design within an existing building, which creates additional challenges. You're looking for, what kind of relationships are already there that I can take advantage of. Now, when you're building new, of course, now you've got much greater freedom and latitude to manifest exactly what you want in the terms of the geometry.
And you've got quite the portfolio. I
Yeah,
don't know
we've
how
built
much of that you've shown publicly, but it
not
is
much. Yeah, you've seen some of it.
quite the portfolio. I mean, I was very, very impressed by everything. You've done such a wide range of things. And I think people often associate what you're doing as just thought work that you've been working on, but you put this into practice and you've been putting it into practice for a very long time.
Well, yeah, in spite of the fact that I'm, an eccentric and preferably a eccentric researcher, uh, semi-hermitage, that kind of thing. I have been helping with my brother run a building business for 40 years. So I've learned in spite of myself to, be able to deal with the practical world of pulling together, teams of people, uh, from your skilled craftspeople to your clients, to your suppliers, to your inspectors, to your financiers, taking a piece of property, figuring out the potential of that piece of property or an old building, looking at the potential of that, figuring out how to like take an old useless building, bring it back to life, resuscitate it, resurrect it, if you will, or to create something new from a site. So yeah, and that's just something I've learned to do. My our father was a builder. Our grandfather was a builder. So I came up in the profession, and didn't and wasn't going to start out to do that. I ended up doing that because um, I realized I really liked building stuff and I liked designing stuff. Initially, I didn't get into the design. That first 10 years, I was just learning the mechanics of building, how you built things, and learning from other builders and architects and things. I worked with a lot of architects and, with different approaches. And, it took 10 to 20 years before I felt confident enough to where I could sit down on paper and start designing. So I would say I really started the designing process in the 80s. And then it just sort of expanded exponentially. We built up our crew and we went from small projects up to million, multi-million dollar projects. And we've pretty much, to brag a little bit, I think we pulled off, successfully completed every project we ever started. I don't think of one exception. And so, now my vision and dream is to build a school where all these principles are being brought together. And we could see if we take the ancient principles, the ancient techniques, and and I will talk about, and I will mention lost technology, lost
Mm.
science. I think that in spite of the skeptics, the pseudo skeptics, I think we can make a very strong argument that yes, there has been technological and scientific advancement in prehistory, and a lot of that fueled the legacy that we've inherited today, which is pretty much all going back historically, halfway back through the Holocene. Um, but we're in a position now, I think, where we can actually reverse engineer some of these things that we see. I mean, when you look at Stonehenge, and as an example, when you look at the pyramids, this is completely outside the purview of mainstream Orthodox archaeology. I look at Stonehenge as a machine, a type of machine. And it was a part of a much vaster system of technology. When I look at the truncated earthworks of eastern woodlands in North America, and I see the very carefully laid stratum of alternating organic and inorganic materials that make it up. It was not just piling up a big hunk of earth. No, these things were very carefully structured. There was a reason for that. There was a reason why they carried the altar stone of Stonehenge almost 500 miles from northern Scotland to southern England over tremendously challenging terrain of thick forests and mountains and rushing rivers, or conversely by sea through the stormy North Sea, carrying a 12-ton stone uh, that had very special properties and was very high in metals, which is what allowed geologists who were trained in petrology to actually realize that the altar stone was a third type of stone. In addition to the sarsen stone, predominantly quartzitic and sandstones, or the blue stones, which were predominantly basaltic rhyolites, the the altar stone was a completely different type of stone, and it was high in metal, particularly barium. But it was a very unique lithology or petrology. Um, and as the archaeologists who realized that, and the geologists realized, well, they would have had to expend a great deal of effort to transport that thing 450 to 500 miles to set it up right on that midsummer sunrise axis. So that morning of the summer solstice, as the sun is rising in the east, in the southeast, um, I'm sorry, the northeast, that ray of light is shining right down the axis of Stonehenge and illuminating that stone, the altar stone that's high in metal. And they wouldn't have done that. First of all, it implies not only that we know this now, that the lunar alignments and the solar alignments are intrinsic to the layout and orientation of Stonehenge. We also know now that apparently there was some sophisticated geological knowledge at work. How did they know that this stone was high in barium and other metals? To go to all that, expend all of that effort to transport it down, have it stand there at the center of the monument, which is, by the way, a monument that is exemplifies the squaring of the circle exercise and the Earth-Moon relationships. But on that one particular morning, the ray of sun comes down the axis of Stonehenge and illuminates, or would have illuminated, that altar stone before it fell over. Why did they do that? Well, it was a religious ritual. It was some kind of a ceremony because they were, so they believed in the supernatural, whatever. No, I don't buy any of that. I think these people were very sophisticated. Somebody had an advanced knowledge of astronomy and geology and petrology and geometry. They were able to organize on a tremendously advanced social level to pull this off. Stonehenge is just one monument among dozens and dozens. I mean, look at Avebury, huge. Look at Karnak. I mean, you could go through this list. There were literally hundreds of stone structures. What was going on there? Why were these ancient peoples so obsessed with building stone structures
Hmm.
out of stone and carefully stones that were carefully chosen because of their properties? Well, I would say the obvious conclusion is that the answer is technological.
Hmm.
It was part of some type of a technology that's been forgotten, and I believe we're on the verge of recovering that for multiple reasons. And I think it was a technology that was very utilized changes in the geomagnetic field, properties of the Earth energies itself, probably involves the creation of or the utilization of plasma energy, the fourth state of matter, which we know is susceptible to electromagnetic fields and changes in electromagnetic fields. But that's way beyond what we're going to talk about tonight. But in the classes beyond the introduction, those are exactly the kind of topics we would be exploring. How are all of these components part of a ancient system of technology, if you want to look at it, mystical technology? What do we got here? Okay, Randall Carlson, Sacred Geometry. Yeah, there it is now. Okay, awesome.
So
Oh, there's only 16 left.
there's only 16 left. And you've mentioned a couple times here that this is the beginning of a journey, I guess you could say. And I want to highlight something for everybody listening because you've said this on Big Picture Podcast, you've said it on Squaring the Circle podcast, but what these retreats are somewhat of the first form of or first forms, they've been happening for years, of what you want to be doing at your education center that you
Yeah.
plan to build. So I mean, I'll keep this page up so people know that, I mean, this is, I'll scroll through it, this is the URL for it, this is where you can get tickets, but tell people about what you're trying to build, what we're trying to build with the education center and your vision for it.
Well, throughout the ages, people were motivated to the applications of this knowledge. And one of the most prevalent of these applications was through sacred building and the creation of schools. And, if you look at the ancient schools of initiation, whether I mentioned earlier the Dionysian artificers, the Eleusinians, the Roman Collegium, the Comachines, later on the guild builders of the High Middle Ages, the Freemasons, the Rosicrucians, etc., they were all dealing with different aspects of what I think was the totality of this ancient system. And there's a lot here to it, and I'm just one guy. I'm very much interested in collaborative efforts with other researchers. That's one of, to me, the value of doing these kinds of things is it brings people together to share ideas, to share knowledge, to discuss, to debate, to try to get to the essence of what these our ancient ancestors were doing with this kind of knowledge, and then to be able to transplant the archaic traditions into our own times and see what could emerge if we actually start experimenting with prototypes utilizing some of these principles that we've been talking about in the uh, in the discussion here tonight: the geomantic mapping, the cosmic orientation, the sacred geometry. It goes beyond that into the acoustic realm, the realm of energy and things that I haven't been able to study. I mean, I've been studying this for a long time. My first forays into sacred geometry were in 1973. Uh, so that's been quite a while ago, probably longer than a lot of the people listening here have been alive. I mean, what were you doing in 1973?
Man, I was kicking ass and taking names.
You were deciding who's going to be mom and pop.
Yeah.
Um,
The,
well,
the,
yeah. So you were, yeah. Uh, so I've got years and years of study and practical experience under my belt. For one thing, I want to I want to pass that on. I want to create a legacy Hopefully I'm going to be around for a while. I'm doing pretty good. I see no reason. And some of the things I'm looking at could suggest some of these principles could actually perhaps be restorative in the sense that we could extend our lifespans. That was another one of the common themes of ancient traditions was the longevity of the
Mm-hmm.
ancient peoples. Is that real? Well, you could ask the question, well, I mean, your run-of-the-mill scholars will be dismissive. I've been very much interested in paleohydrology for many years, which is the study of ancient water movement, right? Well, having been immersed in the study of paleohydrology for well over 30 years now, I can state yes, we now can authenticate biblical scale floods, not supernatural floods that drown every mountain on earth, but when you're talking about a half a billion cubic feet per second, that's a biblical scale flood in my estimation.
Yes, it
And
is.
anybody who survived one like that essentially would be faced with the complete erasure of the world that they knew prior to that flood. And we know that those floods have actually happened in many places around the world. And so, how is it that you have over 100 legends, cultural traditions from Europe, from North America, from South America, from Asia about these gigantic floods? Well, we now know that behind those myths, real events, inspired those myths and those stories. But then you look at the other, which to me implies that we should reevaluate the the authenticity or credibility of other myths as well. For example, the repeated belief that there were the longevity of our ancestors, mostly in the antediluvian or pre-flood world, like in the Bible, these enormous lifespans that were an order of magnitude greater than now was reduced to 120 years, and then that later was reduced to your three score and 10, which is basically the average lifespan today. Um, what's the reality behind that? Is there an actual? Can we actually come up with any kind of evidence at all that there's a reality behind that? Maybe not 800 or 900 years, but at least 120 years, maybe. What's the other universal tradition that we find all over in the myths embedded in all of the lands in all of these times is the belief in gods plural, right? So what's the reality behind that? In Christianity, you've got angels and archangels. In other traditions, you've got gods and goddesses, but yet the attributes are very similar from one culture to a next. What's the reality behind that? Well, that's something that I like to explore. And in my lectures and so forth, I really do get into that and exploring what that might mean. Interestingly, I mentioned the system of gematria or gematria
Mm-hmm.
earlier. I think that has a lot of clues because most people don't realize that a lot of these sacred scriptures, like, well, I'll use the Bible. I mean, I have a tremendous reverence for the Bible, right? Although I don't interpret it in your conventional way, because what I discovered and have researched to my own satisfaction that when you read the Bible stories, those stories are just the outer form of an inner tradition. And when you peel back those stories and you begin to realize that the language in the alphabet in which those stories are composed is actually mathematical, it opens up a whole other dimension, a whole other realm that's hiding within sacred scriptures and sacred writings. And guess what? When you start looking at those numbers that emerge from there, they're the same numbers that we find embedded in the cosmological domains of time and space, that we find in the geometries, etc., etc. And I don't think that's a coincidence. But it's something that's so extraordinary that your conventional rational mind, your academically trained rational mind, they can't deal with it. They don't want to deal with it because they think that they've got a rational comprehension of reality, when in reality is what is the saying, there are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy? Yeah, there absolutely is.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, I mean, I think we're wrapping up here. So I'll just say what Randall just talked about here is what you guys are supporting every time you come to an event, everything that you're doing to contribute, whether it's a live stream, whether it's a super chat, whether it's buying a ticket for this. This is all going towards a larger vision. The hope is that there can be uh, an education center, both in person and digitally, that people can look to inspire them to create great things and to learn about the true history of humanity and to be curious. So everything that you guys contribute to is building towards this, and
It's
that's
it,
what.
it it's quite a thrilling experience when you go out to a site and you put that pole in the site and you draw a circle around it and then you watch the sun coming up and you trace the movements of the shadow. And typically imagine in Egypt, I think this was one of the functions of the obelisk because the point at the top would create a nice pointed shadow. And you follow you trace the movements of that shadow as the sun is rising, arcs over again to the northern hemisphere to the due south at high noon, and then sets in the west. What you have is in the morning, it's coming up, you have this long shadow that's doing two things. It's swinging around as it's growing shorter, and when the point of that shadow hits that circle, you mark that point. And then at high noon, when the shadow is when the sun is due south, the shadow points due north, it's going to be its shortest. Then the sun starts setting in the west, the shadow swings around and grows longer, and then sometime in the afternoon, the point of that shadow hits your circle again. You drive that second stake, and that gives you your first axis. And that axis is determined and unique to your latitude on the Earth, and then you build your geometry around that axis. And it's just tremendously thrilling in its way to participate in that and then begin to understand the hidden geometry of our our world. And our world is not just planet Earth. It's the moon, it's all of the planets in the solar system, it's the comets, it's the sun, it's the heliosphere in which we are immersed. It's all of these things. And when you first begin to make that integration between your consciousness and these greater cycles, it is tremendously thrilling. It's like the ultimate aha moment when you start getting this stuff. And you realize that the inner domain is a reflection and the outer domain are reflections of each other.
Amen. Well, I'll leave this up here for a second, but
Okay.
as we mentioned a couple times throughout the stream, there are special discounts available for tickets. These will be gone in 24 hours, and that 24-hour period started about 2.5 hours ago. Wow, Randall, we've been on here for 2.5 hours. Um, always seems to happen that way. I didn't realize that. But if you want in-person tickets for 720, this is the code that you're going to use at checkout, SG8640, which is 8640. Some significance there, as well as for the live stream, it's SG4320, and that is to get 20% off for live stream tickets, and you're getting about $75 off, $72 off for in-person tickets. You can go to this link right here, and this will be available for 24 hours only. So if you can do it now. If you need to think about it, get finances in order. If you have the means, we try to make the two options, if you can't come in person, accessible to come via live stream.
And let me mention this too that we're going to create a little, kind of a self guided quiz and test if you're doing the live stream at home uh, to qualify because there's no point in going on to the higher levels of this kind of study if you don't have the basics. So the idea is this first retreat is this is the basics. Of course, we're going to get into some cool stuff, but the basics, you want to master that. And then you can move to the next level. And so we will be, what I'm thinking is for the live streams at home and even for the in house retreats, we'll have a series of, kind of bonus uh, online gatherings where we can, people can ask questions about the stuff that they're learning in the retreat. Um, Maybe if somebody is stuck on something, we can go over some of that to make sure that everybody really has a pretty proficient level before going to the next uh, a level of understanding before we go to the next level of training. And I really want to see this stuff become mainstream, and that's part of the vision. And building a center utilizing these principles where we can actually gather and see the principles in action is really going to, I think, be valuable and could serve as a prototype. Where we test, we experiment, we maybe work out the bugs, we perfect the process, and then others can come there and learn what we're doing. Very much like during the Middle Ages when you had the journeyman, right? The journeyman, what you had was that all of these different chapters of the guilds were working and experimenting with different different aspects of this vast science knowledge here. And the journeyman would say, for example, might spend 3 years studying in one school and they would journey to another. They would learn, they would exchange information, exchange knowledge. They would make a circuit. Maybe after 7 years, they would come back to their home lodge and share with what they had learned. So there was this continuous streaming of new insight and new knowledge that took place during that milieu of cathedral building. And we're going to do the same thing again, except now we have tools they didn't have. Back then, they relied, for example, one of the internet of the Middle Ages was the troubadours. The troubadours would come around ostensibly, you know, with music and song and poetry and entertainment, but at the same time, they're bringing they're becoming transmitters of knowledge. So they had various means of transmitting and keeping that stream or that flow of knowledge going. A lot easier for us now. Let's take advantage of the tools we have. So we start with just like we're doing now. We're meeting digitally, but let's meet under the stars.
Let's do it. Thanks, everybody. Randall, I think we had between X and YouTube today, we got 5,400 people on X right now watching live. And we have, I think, 700 watching live right now on YouTube. So
Wow.
lots of people tuned in. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. And we hope to see you on the 28th.
Absolutely. Thanks, everybody. I wish I could see and meet every one of you and shake your hands. Um, I don't think that'll happen, but I don't know. Hopefully, we'll be having some, the online part of the school. We're going to have digital meetings where we can actually see each other and interact and so forth. Oh, let's mention too that we're going to have a briefing meeting for the in-house attendees, where we share specifics and what the itinerary is going to be. We may have to make last minute adjustments depending on weather and things like that. But we're going to have some briefing, at least one briefing meeting where anybody who's doing an in-person ticket will be able to join us, and we will answer questions and share information and updates and all of that kind of stuff.
Awesome.